This conference will now be recorded.
Thank you, Carla, and I appreciate everybody taking time out of their day to talk a little bit about advocacy and how you guys can make a difference in your roles as APRNs. I do understand that all of you or most of you aren't from Missouri, so some of the slides here will be somewhat specific to Missouri, but we'll try to make those applicable to you guys no matter what state you might be in. So, as Carla mentioned, the advocacy process is very critically important, especially if you happen to live in one of the states um, where full practice is not a reality. That's something that we've been trying to do here in the state of Missouri for quite some time, and hopefully we'll make some headway with that here fairly soon. So, as far as my background is concerned, I've been a lobbyist for 18 years, 18 plus years. Started working with the Association of Missouri Nurse Practitioners back in 2016. I also, in addition to serving as a lobbyist, I also serve as the executive director and chief executive officer of the association, and then we also lobby. My firm lobbies for a number of other different organizations as well. So, really, kind of what we're going to talk about here today is the various different elements of advocacy, how you guys need to message things, how important relationships are. Talk briefly about the legislative process and what your role is. At the end of it, we'll kind of open it up for questions if anybody has any questions, and hopefully, you guys will walk away from this better informed about what you guys need to do. So, in terms of an association, associations are the ones that are doing the majority of the advocacy. There's three different, I'd say, tiers or specific reasons for an association to exist. Number one, you got to inform people. So we've got to raise the awareness, whether it's legislators, whether it's the general public, whether it's the membership, raise the awareness of what the organization's for and what the purpose is. Secondary to that, we need to educate folks. A lot of associations offer conferences and continuing education. That's another role of the association. And then finally, what we're going to talk about here today is the advocacy piece of it. So we need to be seen as the advocate for an organization, whether it's legislatively, whether it's through public awareness, whatever it is. We need to be the champion for the organization, and that's really why an association exists. So if you're not a member of your state's association, I would strongly recommend that you take a look at that because they do fulfill a very important role. As far as advocacy programs are concerned, there's three specific functions there and elements of it that I believe are critically important. Number one is grassroots advocacy. That is where you guys would take, as students or as practicing professionals, you guys would actively do visits with elected officials, make phone calls to elected officials, send emails to elected officials. Basically, the constituent face. That's the grassroots component. Secondary to that, you guys probably hear a lot about money in politics. That's a very important piece of it, unfortunately. We need to support candidates that support us, give them the resources that they need. Campaigns are very expensive, and it takes money to run those. So that's certainly an element of an effective program. Finally, is the lobbying piece of it. That's what we do. Um, we have extensive relationships all across uh, government, whether that's with staff, whether it's with the elected officials, whether it's with administrative agencies. We have extensive experience in relationships, and we know the process. We know how to work things, which levers to pull in order to make things happen. When you take a look, at least here in Missouri, when you take a look at some really effective advocacy programs, a lot of times the electric co-ops have a very effective program. Farm bureaus, the National Rifle Association, the unions, the chambers, a lot of those individuals, when you take a look at model grassroots programs, that's the one. As far as grassroots are concerned, the advocates that we have here in Missouri, we want them to be well informed. We constantly inform them about various things that are occurring and how those things can have an impact on their practice. We prefer to have our grassroots advocates very well spoken. We want them to be able to communicate the message with clarity. Um, Easily mobilized. That means that we can send something out to them and they can immediately fire off an email, or within a reasonable amount of time, fire off an email or make phone calls to people whenever we need it. Because usually when we're asking for it is when we absolutely need it. An effective advocate usually stays very focused on message. It's very easy to get off in the weeds and talk about a variety of different things that aren't necessarily relevant to the topic at hand. But a good advocate stays focused on the message and communicates the association's position. It's very easy for people to inject their personal opinion, but it's really the association's position is what the grassroots advocates need to make sure that they convey. Also, it's important for grassroots people to maintain relationships with officials in their district, the state representatives, the state senators, the congressmen, the U.S. senators, making sure that they put a constituent face with the name and with the issue is critically important too. You guys are going to be experts in your field, and usually that's recognized by the elected officials that you are advocating with. They generally view you as the experts on that issue and not them. I will tell you that nurse practitioners are very APRNs in general are very passionate about their issues. Of all the groups that we manage, I would say that the NPs are probably the most passionate for good reason. You guys have invested a lot of time and energy. It's a calling for you guys more than anything else, and they tend to be very passionate about it.
Derek,
Um, yeah,
Derek, we
yeah,
have, I think 27 of the 30 are CRNA students. Either
okay,
they're practicing or they're not practicing yet, but I think we have 3 or 4 that are APRNs that are nurse practitioners. But
great,
there are a whole variety of opt-in and opt-out issues with all the different states they live in. So I think they very much understand why it's important to be passionate about being competent. So I
for
did
sure.
want to frame that.
Yeah. Thanks for that clarification there. But don't ever harness that passion. Keep it up because that's what's needed in order to affect change. Um, Grassroots advocates are also willing to present their opposition's position, right? So the people that are on the other side of you, it's always important that you say here's their issue with what we're saying, and here's why we think that's a bad idea. That establishes more credibility with elected officials when you do that, and it's certainly something that we encourage. One of the things that we don't encourage grassroots advocates to do is over engage. Don't consistently, don't be the boy who cried wolf and just constantly say, over and over again, we have the same issue over and over and over and over again. Every time you talk to that individual, a lot of times that turns elected officials off. As far as political action committees are concerned, this is just some money that has been kind of floating around within Missouri here over the past couple of election cycles. As you can see there's an awful lot of money that gets floated around, and that amount is only increasing. So when people ask you to contribute to the political action committees, there's a very valid reason that they're doing that because that support is desperately needed. You guys won't know these people, but this is just an example of some individuals and organizations that have committed a lot of money in Missouri politics. Again, this isn't relevant to you guys, but just an example of how much money is thrown at it. As far as PACs are concerned, they're more important than ever before, especially in Missouri where there's term limits. That's campaigns take a lot of dollars. Contrary to what you may hear, they don't buy votes. A lot of people think lobbyists buy votes, and that's not true. PACs really all they're doing is they're giving the candidates the resources they need to run their campaigns. And that's an unfortunate reality of what we're dealing with legislatively. Um, as you can imagine, there's a lot of rules and regulations associated with political action committees. That's oftentimes very complex, whether it's at the federal level or at the various different state levels. They're oftentimes very complex. The PACs need to be well funded. They need to make sure that you're able to support candidates that support your causes, as well as leadership, campaign committees, that sort of thing. And what we found, usually the most successful legislators are the ones that raise the most amount of money. Those are the ones that ascend to leadership positions because they're able to take the money that they raise and help support other candidates. The PACs are under a microscope more so now than ever before, and that doesn't. I don't expect that to change anytime soon. As far as lobbyists are concerned, I'm sure some of you guys have probably heard a lot of negative things about lobbyists. contrary to what you hear, we're not bad people. We are advocates for our clients. Uh, I would say that we have an obligation, both professionally and ethically, to be honest and forthright. And if you're not that way, what we found a lot of times is that those individuals that are less than honest, they don't last very long. But we do have a very extensive knowledge of the legislative process. That process, as you'll see here in a second, is very complex. And over the years, we figure out, what that process looks like, how to work various different angles of it, and that's really the kind of the benefit of belonging to a state association, is to make sure that that you guys that have a voice in the Capitol, and somebody that knows how the process works, and the various different players. Uh, there's a lot of procedural rules, and that can either make or break a successful passage of a piece of legislation. And so it's important that any lobbyist that's working for you have a pretty good idea of all of those various different rules. Another thing is that we have a historical knowledge of people and issues. Legislators come and go in various different capitals across the country, but the lobbyists tend to stay, and they generally know the history of issues and are able to convey that to elected officials that may be new to the process. We also have a lot of very good relationships with legislators. They view us as the kind of the resource for them, and we work on cultivating those relationships over time for a number of different ways and mechanisms that we do that. We also have good relationships with staff. That's key. That's very, very important to have those good relationships with them. They are oftentimes the gatekeeper for the legislators, and so it's important to have those relationships. We also have good relationships with other lobbyists. There's a lot of times coalitions are necessary to pass issues, and so it's important that we have good relationships with other folks that are representing clients that may have other issues that are similar to ours. I mentioned it just a second ago, but we're kind of the go-to resource for information. Term limits here in Missouri has made lobbyists more powerful. Um, there's a number of different reasons for that, but not the least of which is the fact that that legislators don't know issues like they used to know before. Where they may have worked on that issue previously, they may have worked on that issue for 10, 15 years. They don't have that same luxury now. A lot of times you don't hear this, but because lobbyists are oftentimes maligned, but a lot of times the work that we're doing is saving consumers money. And I could give you specific examples of it, but in the interest of time, I'll just say that despite what you may hear about us, oftentimes we're the kind of the individuals that are helping pass policies that limit price increases or taxation or things like that on our clients. So it does help save consumers money. Shifting to messaging here. This is really kind of what you guys need to know and understand in your role as leaders in your profession. Messaging with legislators is very, very important, very key. If I could convey nothing else, I would say make sure that your messaging is very short, sweet, and to the point. These legislators oftentimes have, despite what you may hear in the media, they are extraordinarily busy. They are constantly running from meeting to meeting to meeting, and having a very succinct message that they can, that like soundbite brevity, that 40-second or that 1 minute elevator pitch is very important, and will make you a better advocate whenever you're interacting with these elected officials. Well, it doesn't matter if it's the in-person visits, whether it's phone call, whether it's emails. Make sure that's it's short, sweet, and to the point. That it's factual, and that it is respectful, and make sure that you communicate and ask. Right. So if you want them to do something, make sure you come out of the gate with that and say, hey, here's what we're asking you to do. We're either asking you to support this legislation or oppose this legislation, and here's why. As part of that, it's essential that you identify yourself as a constituent. elected officials give a lot of attention to their constituents more so than they do to these outside interest groups that are trying to influence things. So making sure to communicate that you're a constituent is going to be very helpful for you. As far as content is concerned, don't attack the opposition. Nothing turns a legislator off more than criticizing or bashing your opponent. You should be able to win the arguments on the merits, not by attacking your opponent on stuff. As far as messaging is concerned, there's a lot of different ways to do it. In addition to being in person, there's print, there's television, there's radio, social media. Social media is highly used by legislators, especially Twitter, and it's very, very effective in helping communicate a message. Always make sure that you have a good creative graphics piece of it. You can see the comparison between the two there. On the left is some stuff that our folks have created, and then on the right you see something. If you're handing something out, would you rather hand out something on the left or something on the right? Making sure that it's succinct, and they can read what they need to read, and then and that helps inform them. That's going to be very important. As far as relationships are concerned, I mentioned it earlier, but a lot of legislation there's multiple interests for legislation. So, for instance, for APRNs, we represent nurse practitioners. Well, there's not just nurse practitioners that are APRNs. There's also, CRNAs. There's the CNSs. There's the certified nurse midwives. There's a number of different groups that have an interest in specific legislation. Those relationships that we have with those other organizations are very, very helpful for us, because we're able to basically take that alignment that we have with them and then leverage their resources in addition to our own for help in helping get that passed. And if a legislator sees 6 lobbyists come in versus 1, they know that they've got more, there's more pressure on them essentially than if there was just a single individual. Consolidation resources, I mentioned those, but I will tell you that the coalitions oftentimes require compromise, right? So while we may have the same end goal as our coalition partners, the way that we get there may be drastically different. And so as a result of that, you have to compromise with the other groups within a coalition in order to move the ball forward, because oftentimes they may say, well, yeah, we can accept this but not that, and so you have to find some middle ground. Not only are you negotiating against the competition, but you're also negotiating internally among the coalition, so it's very important. But again, at the end of the day, those priorities usually, and the end goal is aligned. As far as relationships with legislators are concerned, you need to have a multi-dimensional relationship there, and it's not just, don't just contact them whenever you need something from them. Contact them on a regular basis. Make sure that they know your name. They know that you're there to be a resource for them whenever they need you. Again, the constituent piece of it is very essential. Same way with lobbyist relationships. People generally listen to people that they know and trust, right? And so if they have a good working relationship with you, they know you, and they know that you're an honest individual, oftentimes they're going to listen to you more so than they would somebody that they don't know at all. I always say that credibility is my capital within the capital. That means that I've got to be honest and forthright with individuals, and if I'm not, chances are I'm not really going to get anything done. As far as relationships with legislators, access to them is very, very limited during session. But if we have good working relationships with them, and we can leverage that to spend more time with them, that's going to create some more access for us. And that's really what lobbyists are for, is to provide access to legislators that people don't ordinarily have. Despite well, I guess not despite, mutually beneficial interests, right? So we generally have legislators based on mutually beneficial interests. How can I help them? How can they help me? That's an unfortunate kind of quid pro quo part of advocacy. And as far as legislators are concerned, just like interest groups like APRNs, they have to build coalitions themselves, because they're the ones that are actually voting on things. So they've got to reach out to other elected officials and say, hey, I need you to help me out with this. If you help me out with this, I'll help you out with that sort of thing. So it's a quid pro quo all across the aisle. I mentioned it earlier, but the staff is the gatekeeper oftentimes to the elected officials. More often than not, they actually know more about the issue than their boss does, and they're the ones that are communicating uh, whatever the issue is, and whatever the various different people have talked about. They're the ones that are communicating it to their boss, and oftentimes you can get in touch with them a lot easier than you can with the actual elected official. More often than not, they generally are the ones that actually research the issues, and they also are the ones that take the feedback, and they basically say, hey, here's where the majority of the calls are coming from, and here is what most people are saying on this particular issue. It's also important to note that staff is more than just people in the House and Senate offices. There's people in, legislative research. There's people in various different things that budget committees and various different places that make the Capitol go. It's not just the staff of the elected officials. For you guys, I would say I would encourage you to make sure that you're reaching out to the staff so that they know you guys, and well, just like their boss, be willing to reach out to you if they have a question on an issue, and know that you're going to be there for a resource for them. One of the other things I would tell you to do is make sure that you know personal details about the staff members. One of the things that I think makes us as effective as we are is that we genuinely care and demonstrate that care for staff members and people that may not be able to directly help us, but knowing personal details about them and sharing those details with them. How's your son doing, or how's your daughter doing, or that sort of thing. That helps with that relationship building and credibility. So let's shift now to a discussion about the legislative process. As you can see, the things there, the old Schoolhouse Rocks How a Bill Becomes a Law is not really accurate. Um, what is more accurate probably is that graphic that you see there on the right. Uh, I use the football field demonstration. So the legislative process is one of incremental progress, right? So you start out in your own end zone. That's when you're drafting the language, you're filing the bill. That's really the beginning of the process. But at least in Missouri, there's a number of other steps that it has to go through in order to advance the ball all the way down to the other end of the field. If you don't, if you get hung up on the 20-yard line or the 40-yard line or even the 30-yard line on the other side of the field, but you can't advance it past there, you're never going to score the touchdown. You're never going to get the bill across the finish line. And so this illustration here really demonstrates how complex the process is. And at any point, at the 3-yard line or the 47-yard line, that process can break down. And once it breaks down usually for good, and then you have to restart all over at the 1-yard line at the beginning of the next legislative session. So process itself, basically a bill is filed, it's then referred to a committee. A speaker or a Senate pro tem can either refer that bill or not. They don't have to do that. If they don't do that, it stops right there. If they do refer it, it gets heard in committee. Then the committee can say, yeah, we're going to pass it out, or no, we're not. In Missouri, we have rules committees. So if it comes out of the original committee, then it gets sent to rules, and rules says, yes, we're going to approve this to go to the floor, if or not. If it does go to the floor, it's debated on the floor, and then that's, basically if you get a bill passed in one chamber, you have to pass it identically in the other. So it goes all the way through that process where it gets sent to the other chamber, and it goes all the way through that process. Even then, you still have 40 yards to go, right? You still have quite a bit left. You're only 60% of the way there. So once it gets passed in both chambers, you're 60% of the way there. Then it has to, the changes have to be ironed out between the two different chambers, and then it gets sent back to both chambers for them to approve those changes, and they either report those out or they don't report those out, depending on whether or not they agree. And if they do agree, finally it gets a final vote and it gets sent to the governor. And then the last step of the process is essentially the governor signs the bill or vetoes the bill, and it either becomes law or it doesn't become law. So that's a very simple explanation of the process. And I'll send this out to Carla so that she can share that with you if you guys are interested in it. Um, this is basically, these slides here are just a conversation about what we just talked about here. So let me skip through there. Okay. I mentioned this already, but constituents are very, very important. You as an individual, if you're engaging on something, you're representing multiple people, not just yourself. Usually, they legislators like to use a 1 to 100 rule. So if they get one call on something, that means probably 100 of their constituents probably have an interest in it and agree with what you're saying. Make sure that you're identifying yourself as a constituent, uh, and in I can't talk in any interaction that you may have with an elected official. And then again, I mentioned it earlier, but make sure that you're visiting with them even whenever you're not asking them for something. Groups of constituents are even better. If you guys can put together a group, we put together an advocacy group here in Missouri where we do an advocacy day and go visit with the elected officials. When they see those groups, they know that number one, they've taken time out of their day to come visit with them, but it's also indicative of what their district may believe. So those groups are very important. Understand the dynamics of the district. Know that there's going to be if you're an incredibly liberal person in a very, very conservative area, your messaging may have to be shifted a little bit to the elected official. So just make sure that you know the dynamics of that. There are a number of different administrative agencies that we don't want to leave out here. So, within your own states, there are professional registration people that regulate and oversee various different professions, whether it's MDs, whether it's NPs, whether it's PAs, whether it's chiropractors or anesthesiologists or CRNAs, whatever it is. There are administrative agencies, and those individuals can either make or break the implementation of a rule that can either help you or harm you depending on the position on a particular issue. So don't overlook the importance of those administrative agencies and make sure that you have a good working relationship with those folks as well. Your local elected officials, the reason that we bring this up, your city councils, your county councilmen, your county commissions, even your judges and your county clerks, those people, it's important to know those individuals because oftentimes they end up running for a House or a Senate seat after they, when they decide they want to take the next step up. That's usually where they come from. Is those state reps and those state senators generally come from one of the local offices. So I know I'm cruising through here pretty quick, but let's just kind of summarize what you guys can do on your own to help benefit the cause. If you haven't already done so, I would encourage you to find your senators and representatives. Usually most House and Senate websites make that very, very easy to do. Contact staff to schedule an appointment, go in and visit with them, even if you're not asking them for anything. It's just a kind of a touch point, going in and sitting down with them. Learn as much as you can about it, right? Learn their bios. Know what sort of industry they're in, or really kind of what makes them tick, because you'll be able to use that in the conversations that you have with them. Take 4 to 5 talking points and be very, very specific. Don't go off topic. That's nothing can end a meeting with a legislator faster than someone just wandering off into the wilderness talking about things that aren't even relevant to the actual issue at hand. Make sure that you have verifiable information. Identify yourself as a constituent. Make sure you answer the questions honestly and properly. If you don't know an answer to something, it's always better to say, let me look into it. I'll get back to you, or have somebody else get back to you. But we would always prefer we would rather prefer that answer than a false or an incorrect or a misleading answer that could come back and harm us in the future. So make sure that whenever you're done with that meeting, give them a business card and say, hey, we want to be a resource for you. If something ever pops up you have a question on, don't hesitate to reach out to me, and I'm happy to address it. And then follow that up with an email and say, hey, this is so and so. I met you a couple of weeks ago, or I met you last week, or I met you yesterday. Just here's my contact information. Just wanted to remind you that here's where we stand on this issue, and would appreciate your support. Or if you're asking them to impose something, make sure that you're communicating that too. Within Missouri, and probably with a lot of other associations, there's a number of different things that you guys can do. You can join your advocacy committee, where you're reviewing policies and seeing how that impacts you professionally. You can help mentor other students or just other members of the association. You can contribute to a PAC, even if that's $20, $200, $2,000, whatever you can do helps. And then engage locally. Make sure you're attending these fundraisers and these candidate forums that are happening there locally. That's going to be helpful, and it's going to be helpful for you guys to establish those relationships. Write and call your elected officials. If your association asks you for help on that, by all means, they need it, and they're asking you to engage for a very specific reason. If they do have advocacy days, usually those are planned out well in advance, and you'll have opportunity maybe to take off work or not schedule patients that day. I cannot tell you how important that is to attend those and get an idea of what that process looks like. And then you can start help lead other or other individuals within your association. You can help lead those individuals in the future. And if you can testify on legislation, we would strongly encourage that. Usually that's really the point where grassroots advocates like yourself will have a very significant impact, is if you have a compelling story to tell. You tell that in committee, and they oftentimes they'll listen to that, and they may change their mind as a result of something that they heard in committee, or it may underscore what they already knew to be true, and maybe you're providing them with some facts or some background or some experienced information that they may not have otherwise had before. So always encourage you guys to be an advocate, and I know I got through there very, very quickly, but we'll kind of open it up for questions there. That's my contact information. I'm sure you guys won't need that, but if you do ever have a question about something and you want an answer to it, by all means, you can reach out to Carla, and I'm happy to answer whatever question you have, even if it means that you're from a different state. So I'm going to stop there and see if anybody has any questions specifically for me.
If you have a question, please unmute and then go ahead and ask it.
How would we identify lobbyists within our own areas?
Yeah, it's a great question. A lot of state ethics commissions have searchable forms that if you're trying to find what I would probably, the easiest thing I would recommend for you to do is to get on your state's association's website and see who their director of government affairs is, or just send an email to your state association, because usually that's where the lobbyists are coming from, is from the state associations. So a lot of times they'll have those listed on the websites. And if you're having a hard time with it, I'm happy to look and see if I can help you find out who that is. But I would first check your state association website, and if that doesn't work, you can always check the State Ethics Commission. They usually have that information.
Other questions? I have one. Derek, how long does the legislative process that you described with the football field take for approval if, let's say, it's a bill that everybody thinks is wonderful? How long does that take to go through that process?
Yeah, it varies. A bill can get fast tracked. Honestly, they could get fast tracked in a couple of weeks. But usually the process itself, the overwhelming majority of bills take years and years and years to pass, because it's just constant compromise. It's constant work to try to massage the language to get it to a point where everybody agrees with it, and it is okay with it moving forward. So it's not uncommon at all for an issue to take 5 years to get something passed. But if it's also, if it's a lot of times when we see reactionary things, those generally get fast tracked. But if it's, if it's reactionary to some sort of a hot topic in the news or something like that. But
What would an
ordinarily,
example look like for that fast tracking?
um, well, I'm trying to think of an example this past legislative session. Um, I can't think of any off the top of my head. It's escaping me. But a lot of times, like with school shootings, things like that, things that stay in the news a lot, or some sort of a catastrophic incident happens, and then all of a sudden there's kind of a knee-jerk reaction to do something legislatively to address it. Um, so there's those sorts of issues is something that usually gets fast tracked.
Okay. Other questions?
I realize that this is certainly not the most interesting topic in the world for folks, but it is critically important that you guys understand how important it is. It I've always heard it said, and I repeat the mantra quite often. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu, right? So if you guys aren't engaging, I can assure you that people who don't want you to progress, and your people that would typically be opposed to your issues, they're at the table, they're engaging. So don't take it lightly, especially as individuals who have a leadership role that you guys will be in. That's more important than even those that may not have the same uh, level of responsibility.
So, for an example, class, the APRN uh, for nurse practitioners' journey to have access for patients and to have full practice authority has been going on, what, 20 years, Derek?
Oh, I'd say yeah.
20 years we've been fighting this battle, and we still aren't there. We have had a shift in, I think, opinions from our legislators. We have a very, very, did you see the numbers? We had 69% Republican representation and, 31% Democrat. So we have a very conservative uh, legislator uh, content in both the House and the Senate. Much even, and tell me if I'm lying about anything, Derek, but it's even more evident in the Senate that
Yeah.
the Republican caucus is very, very strong. So we have had physician representatives and Senate representatives on both of those sides for how many years? And we continue to, but what would you say, Derek?
Ever since I've been lobbying, which has been
18 years.
18 plus years,
Okay.
I've
Okay.
not been working on APRN issues for 18 years, but
Right.
there's been a physician in the legislature at least all of those 18 years. Now, this is our first opportunity this year to have a House and Senate that, well, I shouldn't say a House because the House does have a physician in it. The Senate, which is historically our roadblock on these APRN issues, is usually a physician in the Senate. Depending on how a specific race goes over in the St. Louis area, that we'll either have another physician in the Senate, which will be another obstacle for us, or we won't have any at all, that would certainly be our preference.
So, from a standpoint of what we're doing for advocacy in this state is basically we're going to be presenting one bill, and we're going to focus on that one bill, which is actually a bill about access to care, and full practice authority gives us the ability to practice in all areas of the state. Our rural component in our state is overwhelmingly predominant. So I would say we have three big cities. Now we have other little ones, but we have three big cities in Missouri. The rest is rural. So anybody, raise your hand if you're practicing in a rural or come from a rural or live in a rural, okay, area. Okay, I see 3. So what's the reality for that? Take yourself off mute and tell me how easy it is to get to a physician or get to a hospital or get care.
I'll speak first if that's okay. This is Amanda McComas.
Hi.
That's actually what I'm working on for my policy development is actually improving access to care because currently, if you look at our community health needs assessment in the past year, over 70% of our community that participated responded that the emergency department was their PCP or the urgent care. In order to get an appointment, we do have a federally funded health center that started about 11 years ago, but they're actually booking 6 months out now. So
What?
it's very, very
6
challenging.
months?
They're booking 6 months out. And for mental health, it's even worse. They're not even accepting new unless they're referred from within the health center. So some serious challenges with that, and then the health education.
Thank you for that feedback. Trinice, what did, we have something in the chat, Derek. What did Trinice say? Trinice Turner.
Looks like it says I used to work in
Can you find the chat?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Okay. Yeah, now we can.
Yeah, it says I used to live and work in a
I'm
rural
sorry.
community, and the access to care is a major issue.
Okay. All righty. Thank you. Who else raised their hand? Okay. Go ahead, dear. Either one of you guys.
I can't see anybody else, but I'll go ahead and
Okay.
speak.
Go ahead and go.
Um, I'm from a really small town. It's called Grundy, Virginia. But I know a lot of my classmates in the nurse anesthesia program are from like Charlottesville. And I actually have a lot of patients here that we just don't have the resources that they need, like the critical care unit that I worked in before starting the program. We didn't have nephrology, we didn't have neurology, we don't have um, any kind of mental health provider. So a lot of times these patients are depending on access at larger facilities such as UVA, which is a large, um, it's an area where a lot of people from my area go to receive care. So that's just a big issue as well, just getting practitioners in here so that it is more accessible. And then like the Miss, I think that her name was Amanda, just said, just getting people to be aware that they need to use those resources rather than going to the emergency room and things like that.
Thank you. I had a friend call me last night, and she has a very good friend in the rural area of Missouri who had a heart cath, and they nicked his esophagus. Whoops. And so there was no access to any kind of specialty services in this facility. I don't know why they were cathing people, but anyway, and they transferred to St. Louis. So the complications that occur in some rural areas are not easily rectified because they just don't have the resources that are needed. So someone else was going to talk. Go ahead.
So I live in a small town, Rockingham County in North Carolina, kind of like right on the Virginia border, surrounded by a couple large cities like Greensboro and Winston. But for me, where I live, it's about an hour drive to get to a level 2 or a level 1 trauma center. And I think even to get to a stroke center, which, I mean, if you have a stroke out here, I guess that's probably not a really good thing if you need intervention. I mean, we have some primary care access, but I'm allergic to bees and I got stung by a bee like a month or so ago and actually passed out before the ambulance got to my house. But I worked at a facility in Winston, which is an hour away, and the way they set their insurance up, you have to go to a Novant facility to have the best insurance, I guess. And I only have access to one, what is it called? Like a healthcare system where I live that they'll take me to, which isn't where I work. So, also a gap that I've noticed especially in nursing school, is on our side of the county. If you don't have access to a car or you're like in the underserved population, to get to the health department is probably a 35-40 minute drive, which isn't very ideal for somebody who needs free care from the health department. So I noticed that as well.
That's very true. So what do people do when they have social determinants of health that prevent them from having access? What do they do about their health care, guys?
They don't go,
They
probably.
don't. They don't. It's not going to be priority for them. So does anybody know what the percentage or the mortality rate for the rural communities are in regard to the chronic health conditions and the mortality versus the urban? There's a 15% gap. And that's just unbelievable when you think about it. Okay, other things, I'm going to just entertain questions one other time after I share some information from you, because Derek is very clear about what you need to do when you advocate for your passion, or what you need to do with a legislator. And I really wish that I could have flown down and gone to all your different states and done Advocacy Day in person with you, because I love to do it, because it's a really invigorating experience. So you focus on the message, and you make sure that you focus on the message. That's what I want you to do with your PowerPoints and your papers. Focus on the message, focus on the policy, and how you're going to take those action steps to be able to advocate and achieve your goal. So that's a really big point. The other point that you're going to be doing when you do your peer review, and I'm going to send out your partners again. I did it early in the year, but I'm going to send it out one more time because that's coming up. When you do your peer review with your partner, part of what you're going to do is present the opposition's position. So you're going to poke holes in your partner's paper, and you're going to poke holes in their assumptions or their assertions or their data, because what you want to do is you want to be that opposition so that that paper for your partner is the best it can be. Now, what Derek said was you need to make sure that you present the opposition and the position so that that you're not being perceived as adversarial. But that's what that peer review exercise is about. I learned a lot from Derek. He's my hero. Okay, any other questions?
I'd be the first person. You'd be the first person that's ever called me their hero, Carla.
You are my hero, Derek. Anybody else? Is anybody really upset to get out an hour and 7 minutes early? Because I can keep you. Okay. All right, guys. See some of you. Oh, okay. Trinice says no, ma'am. She's done with me. Okay, good. So I'll see some of you. I've seen some of you at the first presentations this past week. Everybody's doing really well. So I'm really looking forward to the rest of the presentation. So I'll see you all over the next few days. Bye.
Good luck, guys.
Thank you for speaking.
You bet.
Thanks, Derek.
Yep.
Thank you, sir. Have a great day. Thank you, Dr. V.